the Library Freedom Act, an amendment from the fictional universe of a manga series called Library Wars made in 2006, a series where libraries have militarized to defend against government censorship through a watchdog agency called the MBC. The Library Task Force, under the rights of the Freedom Act, defends the rights of their patrons to read whatever materials are requested. On the surface, this may just seem like a science fiction premise. We're not going to see librarians strapped anytime soon. But Library Wars isn't just a fantasy. Right now, there are thousands of fights over censorship that have been starting over the last 5 years after the COVID lockdown. Groups claiming to fight for their parental rights are looking to have libraries shut down far and wide. They're equipped with the national government's approval and an all-encompassing list of books that they think are too obscene for children, the majority of which are targeting LGBTQ+ and POC stories. Librarians may not be taking up arms like those in Library Wars, but they are struggling with overreach by the national government to keep libraries open and accessible, all while taking the brunt of the blows from online harassment, threats of violence, and even losing their jobs. The tension between libraries and a loud vocal minority are boiling higher every day. In real time, we are seeing the events of this 20-year-old manga come to fruition right before our very eyes.
We continue this morning with the uptick in book bans.
That attempts to ban books in the U.S. surged.
A battle over education.
They're using this book as a weapon.
The fight over banning books in public libraries.
Front lines of a war on words.
They've been going to library board meetings and yelling and screaming at people.
Even if we do nothing to you, eventually, if you don't repent of wanting to harm our children with pornography, that's up to God.
We are not pedophiles or groomers.
But just teach history without, agenda or ideology.
All you have to do is explain to children, and they get it.
There were quite concerning things that she had done at the Library of Congress in the pursuit of DEI and putting inappropriate books in the library.
Moms for Liberty has swelled to more than 85,000 members. Some chapters have pushed to ban or limit access to books in school libraries.
Books that provide no educational content, there's no value to them.
This goes beyond any conservatism and in almost Nazism.
If you're writing about race, if you're writing about sex and gender, then you're on a chopping block.
Librarians are prepared to defend their choices of materials.
Libraries, I believe, are one of the last bastion of democracy.
An illiterate crowd is the easiest to rule.
Not every book is for everybody, but every book is for someone.
Thank you to Walt's Comic Shop for sponsoring today's video. Are you looking for English language manga in the EU? Then Walt's Comic Shop is what you need. They have thousands of manga currently in stock, with an inventory that's growing daily. Walt's offers low shipping prices for any EU country, with bulletproof packaging and speedy customer support. When you enter the code Colleen's MangaRex at checkout, you'll get free shipping on your first order of €40. You can get series like Sasaki and Miyano and many more at waltzcomicshop.com, your #1 source for English language manga in Europe. Now let's get into the video. Book bans are nothing new, and in fact, have a long history being implemented by authoritarian regimes around the world. One of the most famous examples of this was in 1933, when Nazi-supporting youth burned over 25,000 books, mostly written by either Jewish authors or American authors that were blacklisted. Quite a few of these books also came from the Institute of Sexology's library. This was a research institute that was on the forefront of queer and transgender studies. Even earlier than that, in the 1800s of America, the Comstock Law went into effect, which prohibited the circulation of obscene materials in the mail. Obscene things such as sex education or saying that women deserve the rights over their own bodies. While this law was in effect, Comstock himself would go around and arrest anyone with his little groupies that he deemed criminal under his loose definition of what obscenities were. It's not surprising then that there are hundreds of stories out there that are about censorship or banning books. Chances are you yourself have been forced to read one in your high school English class, like Fahrenheit 451 or 1984. Maybe you even had to read The Book Thief, which was set during those book burning eras of Germany that I just mentioned. Yet many of these stories are set in a more fictionalized universe or are set in the past. They take ideas from our world and then plop them into something that is unrecognizable, or they use history to teach us a lesson. Library Wars, however, is very much based in reality. It feels more like a natural extension of how censorship has played out for years now, and where government overreach is heading. This is especially considering the story takes place in 2019. That's why I find this series to be particularly important during this current era of book bans in America. It's not only based on a real-life statement of intellectual freedom that was set in Japan, but it also reflects many of the actual events that are playing out right now in school board meetings and public forums right in your neighborhood. For those who have not read or heard of this series before, Library Wars follows a bright-eyed library task force member named Iku Kasahara. When she was a teen, a new installment of her favorite book series was ripped out of her hands by the Media Betterment Committee, or the NBC, a group who are tasked for censoring obscene or inappropriate books. While Iku tried her best to keep them from taking it, she had little power to stop the government. That is until a library task force member shows up and saves the day, which in turn gives her the spark to pursue a job as a task force member herself. Iku is a great gateway character to the world of Library Wars. Like many of us, she strongly defends libraries and opposes censorship, but isn't quite sure about the politics of it all. Thankfully, her friend and fellow librarian Shibazaki gives her and us a rundown of it all. In this world, the Media Betterment Committee was created by the Board of Education after they passed the Media Betterment Act. This gave them complete control to censor materials deemed offensive and remove materials from public access. On the other hand, the Library Task Force was created by the local government to defend libraries from being raided. It was specifically created after a massacre was committed by an armed political group that was trying to destroy a historic library. Really, the political landscape of Library Wars and our own world run parallel to each other. As conservative groups have ramped up their support of censorship, as well as the Board of Education now being run by billionaire opportunists, we've seen similar tensions grow between the national and local government since 2021. On the national level, politicians are completely denying that these book bans are even happening, claiming that they aren't banning books because they're saving kids from reading porn. Meanwhile, local governments have been trying to combat this by passing laws to make sure that librarians can circulate their materials freely. One example of this being Chicago, which passed HB 2789. This tasked the Illinois State Librarian and the Illinois State Library with adopting the American Library Association's Library Bill of Rights, a similar amendment to the Freedom Act from Library Wars. With all these politics, though, it can get a little confusing for new task force members like ourselves. We may want to protect libraries from censorship, but navigating the world of librarians can be hard to do alone, which is why I made sure to have our own real-life Shibazaki to help guide us throughout this video.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you so much. If you could just introduce yourself and give us a little bit of insight into what your job is.
Yeah, so I'm Ashley Hawkins. I'm pretty commonly known on the internet as the Manga Librarian because I run this website that provides collection development and professional guidance for librarians, primarily in school and public settings. My formal occupation is actually a bunch of different things. I'm a school librarian, as well as an adjunct professor at Queens College, GSLAS. And I'm also a professional reviewer and a professional writer. And I also recently co-wrote a book, Manga Goes to School, Cultivating Engagement and Inclusion in K-12 Settings.
I'm pretty sure a lot of people like me are probably a little confused about like what the inner workings of being a librarian is. And I know when I was a kid, I always just kind of saw them as like working a cash register essentially. So can you give us a little bit of info about what your job entails and what it means to be a librarian?
Essentially, a librarian is somebody who actually does a multifaceted job that encompasses collection development, cataloging, reference work, reader's advisory, programming, and depending on your job, a certain degree of social work.
And what are the differences between being a public librarian and a school librarian?
A public librarian typically will specialize in a particular age group, usually divided between children, young adults, and adults. Public librarians, they serve the public. So they can see just like everybody from every age group just kind of walk through their door. A school librarian, though, is a certified teacher, which is the major difference. We teach classes and we provide support to both students and staff. I also should probably point out that school librarians, at least in the program that I work in, are trained to be public librarians. And they're also required to do their teaching certificate at the same time. So for many school librarians, we hold multiple graduate degrees and advanced certificates.
Damn.
5 years ago, book bans weren't a very common occurrence. According to the American Library Association, only 200 attempts of book challenges were made in public schools or libraries across the nation. This was down from the year prior even, due to the fact that many schools were closed because of COVID lockdowns. However, it's also because of COVID lockdowns that the year preceding, we started to see book bans become a hot topic. Due to the fact that many kids were taking classes at home, parents were starting to become more acutely aware of the things that their kids were being taught. And for some parents, any discussions of race, sexuality, or gender, no matter how tame, was too inappropriate. This is when book bans became widespread, jumping from those 280 challenges prior to, and I'll wait to let you guess. No, higher. A little higher. That's right, 10,000 challenges in 2024. Pressure groups consisting of angered parents began to form through places like Facebook, where entire lists of books would be shared over what they wanted out of their kids' schools. 72% of book bans have then come from these pressure groups the years following. Unlike years prior, when just a singular book would become a subject of commotion for concerned parents, now these groups are flooding library systems with hundreds of books all at once that they want completely gone. It doesn't even matter if these books are in the library, because the goal of it is to completely overwhelm the systems, essentially breaking it and forcing librarians to remove these books as they do individual reviews for however many were on the list. The most notorious group that had gained traction in this time is Moms for Liberty, a self-proclaimed parental rights group that wanted to take obscene and pornographic materials out of schools. The founder of this pressure group is very adamant that that is the only case and nothing else. However, when looking at the books that they are targeting, it is very clear what they deem to be pornographic. Books primarily about LGBTQ experiences and stories. It's a little scary how Library Wars actually portrays a similar situation to this back in 2006. Instead of Moms for Liberty though, this group is named the Caring for the Future of Our Children group, or CFOC for short. At least Moms for Liberty has a catchier name, I'll give them that much. They too are looking to ban books from the access of children and worrying about their safety. Although instead of obscenities, they're worried about violent content. Honestly, the thing that makes Library Wars so of its time is the fact that any sort of censorship is around violent content, because that's what it was in my era. The end goal in either case is the same though: removing books from libraries and limiting what children can read. Library Wars digs into this deeper though by showing how censorship affects children under oppression. When CFOC holds a protest against the library, Iku ends up apprehending 2 kids who tried to disrupt it by throwing firecrackers. After they get scolded, they then tell Iku that their goal was to fight back against these pressure groups. They say that before the group began targeting schools, their library had an extensive collection, but recently all the books they liked were removed by the NBC, making it near impossible to get their hands on it even outside of the library, as censorship was making the prices of books soar. This really isn't so different from what teens and kids in America are dealing with right now either. They are also trying to fight back against these book bans. Many have started banned book clubs, have protested against these school board meetings, and are speaking out for the librarians that they love. Where Library Wars ends on this issue is that the kinds of people who are trying to censor what kids are able to read outright do not respect children as humans. A member of the CFOC group was preaching relentlessly about the harm that these books would do to kids. Yet when the kids voice their own opinions, she mocks them because they couldn't possibly be mature enough to understand. All the kids wanted to begin with, though, was to feel like these adults are listening to them and have freedom to dictate their lives. However, these groups, both CFOC and Moms for Liberty, make sure that that won't happen due to their own views and ideology, allowing no room for questioning with their pre-held beliefs.
I mean, the first thing I'll say is there is no porn in school libraries. Nobody's buying porn. Nobody would, first off, nobody would ever risk their job that way. And also, everybody is responsible. So I want to be very clear. Nobody buys porn. We live in the world of Very Hungry Caterpillar, and especially at the elementary level. Nobody's buying this content for kids. But I think it's like very, very clear that they are targeting books with LGBTQ+ content, but they're also targeting anything that deals with issues of race. Like, they're still continuing, kind of adding on, like, oh, by the way, this too. The list just keeps getting longer and longer. The so-called pornographic content that they target is generally pulled very out of context. And the context is vitally important when assessing works that deal with highly nuanced topics, particularly when we're talking about works that are read by students in 11th and 12th grade. Because we're talking about students that are basically adults reading content that is, at their maturity level. And then a lot of award-winning works by the likes of Angie Thomas, like Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison. So like all these award winners that most of us, when we were in school, we read them. They were parts of like AP class lists. They have been just like wholesale chucked out. I don't think anybody is going onto Pornhub to find any of this. So it's like the mental disconnect is like very, very far.
We shouldn't just be concerned about kids and those working in schools, though. These book bans have already bled out into public libraries as well. States like Alabama have even had whole local libraries defunded because of these pressure groups. And because of this public outcry, the national government has been using it to push their own conservative values into law. After Trump took office in January, his cabinet has issued multiple press releases saying that the book bans happening are a hoax. In addition, the Department of Education has also put out a press release saying that the local control of education works best. Of course, local control is only good if it's backed by conservative groups like Patriot Mobile, which has been able to replace multiple school board members with their own hand-picked parental rights warriors, making it even harder for any books about race or gender to make it into libraries. A growing division between the national and local governments has been going on since Trump's first election. But with the book bans, this split has become even more apparent. Just like in Library Wars, our own war on censorship is making it clear who believes in the freedom of expression and who doesn't. While we haven't had an all-encompassing law passed like the Media Betterment Act, there there have still been smaller bills affecting other states like Florida and Texas. Some of these would change how obscene materials are reviewed. Others would completely criminalize librarians if banned books are found in their libraries. An instance like this is showcased in Library Wars. One of Iku's commanders is suspected of abusing a minor who is just a childhood friend of his. This all because he recommended her a book about a girl with hearing loss because she too has hearing loss. However, when the NBC catches word of this, they arrest him for abusing a person with disabilities, threatening to put him in jail for letting a girl read a book that she might relate to. It's the same thing now that are happening to some librarians. Being accused of pedophilia for letting a teen read a book for teens about teens struggling with teen situations.
Hateful smear campaign fueled by far-right activists who called her a pedophile, a groomer, and accused her of advocating to keep pornographic materials in her library's kids section. She even began to receive death threats, which took a toll on her physical and mental health. But Jones decided to fight back, making headlines after becoming one of the first librarians in the U.S. to sue those who launched those attacks.
What that ultimately means is that there's going to be a lot less diversity in materials. Kids, young people are going to see far less of themselves on the shelves, which is a very dangerous thing. Some of the best experiences I've had with connecting young people with books has been, oh wow, this character is going through exactly what I'm going through. Or, oh wow, I finally understand better what my friend is going through. Or I have this whole new perspective. There was recently a Supreme Court case decision which impacts access to LGBT plus materials. What it actually does is it says that parents can opt their child out from interacting with curriculum that includes LGBTQ plus material. And so I think the more decisions like that are made, the more prevalent book bans become. Parents that are opposed to these bans, and actually we know that the majority of the American public is opposed to these bans. So I think the more that's going on, the more lawmakers, particularly in states like Illinois, New Jersey, New York, I assume California probably is going to have a law like this pretty soon. And so it really will be legislation protecting you at the state level from what's going on.
Now, as manga fans, I think some of us believe that we're safe from these book bans and that they won't affect us. The ending of a Screen Rant article even makes the claim that manga and anime are too popular now to ban, as if popularity has any weight in that debate. It also states that these book bans are only happening in school libraries, which is both wrong and kind of a worrisome thing to just brush off. But to think that manga is too niche to ban or too popular to restrict is to be ignorant. Graphic novels have been some of the most banned content on these pressure groups lists, with stories like Genderqueer, Flamer, and Mouse being on the top. Due to the nature of the illustrated picture as well as being in the limelight more than ever, manga is actually more likely to end up on the chopping block. Much like how video games were once the scapegoat for censorship, comics were too. People went as far as burning them in the 40s, not unlike what they were doing in Germany a couple years prior. Basically, any new media creation that parents can find something objectionable to will become a moral panic. It only took a former child psychologist, Frederick Wertham, to get that ball rolling. He was once famous for his work with underprivileged youth until he started to equate delinquency with reading comics, eventually ending up writing a book called The Seduction of the Innocent, which was all about the perils of children reading Superman. The public soon took Wertham's book and ran with it, generating enough outcry that there was eventually a public trial on whether comics needed to be regulated. Instead of letting the national government do so, though, comics publishers decided to self-regulate, and they created the Comics Code. This heavily sanitized all comics, removing any scene that they deemed too harmful for minors and making sure to portray cops in the best light possible. It's not like the code was required if you wanted your comic to be published, but if you didn't have a stamp of approval, then no distributor would touch you. While it wasn't an outright ban, the censorship of comics absolutely decimated the industry. So with a history of comic censorship in the past and graphic novels being the most targeted banned books right now, we as manga fans need to be just as passionate about these book bans as everyone else. It's not even like we haven't seen manga get banned in the past. Even before this huge wave of book bans became a thing, series like Death Note and Assassination Classroom were #1 with a bullet on many parents' ban requests. Just off the name alone, they were not happy with their kids reading these titles. But now we have been seeing more and more manga caught in the crossfire. And I'll give you one guess as to which series they are. Yeah, the gay ones. Most famously now, we've seen the manga series Sasaki and Miyano get banned from a school library in Florida. The reason for which it was banned being absolutely wild too.
I'm not going to be voting to keep this one there, and I'm just going to tell you why. Again, I've read every one of these books alongside this book committee. This book it focuses on nothing other than a relationship. It's inappropriate. You start the book, you read it backwards, you read it. I mean, it literally, when you start reading a book, which we've been teaching our kids from day one, you start at the beginning and you read from left to right, bottom to top. Not that book, you don't. And so it's just, to me, I'm going, no, this is not the highest and best book that we can offer our kids. And this is volume 1, so I'm not sure where this goes because the entire book is focused on a romantic relationship. So I'm like, if this is volume 1, where does the next one go? So that's the reason why I won't be supporting the committee's recommendation of keeping it. So
since we're discussing, I'm not going to defend this book because I didn't like it. I thought it was kind of stupid.
If it isn't clear enough that this manga was banned simply because two boys were in love with each other, the initial request for reconsidering materials objects to this series because sexual orientation should not be encouraged, suggested, or implanted. Yet, even though everyone at this board meeting decided that there was no reason for this book to be banned, it was still removed from the library. Quite ironic considering that the initial request also stated that a good substitute for this queer manga were two very unqueer manga like Chainsaw Man and Sailor Moon. You know, two series that definitely don't have iconic and overt lesbians in them. Not to mention, sexual orientation in Chainsaw Man is very encouraged. Sasaki and Miyano isn't the first manga series to go, and it definitely won't be the last. Already we have been seeing other queer manga series like That Bride Was a Boy and Wandering Sun being added to these ban lists. Even if you cannot be bothered with LGBTQ stories, which fuck you if so, your shonen action manga aren't gonna be safe either. With new amendments in different states being passed that changes what is viewed as obscenities, all manga is in danger, and that doesn't just include ones that you may not care about. Since 1973, the Miller test is a commonly used way to review what materials are deemed as obscene. There are 3 main guidelines, and the third is usually the most important. Whether a work taken as a whole lacks any serious artistic, literary, scientific, or political value. However, amendments like SB 1692, which passed in Florida, have changed this language to make it easier to take an image out of context from a graphic novel or a manga and deem it harmful to minors. The only thing keeping a whole book from being deemed obscene based on one picture is then approval from the Board of Education, making it sound exactly how the NBC works in Library Wars. In the words of Jeff Trexler, one of our most effective tools in combating attempts to target graphic novels and manga has been to highlight their value when taken as a whole. This bill would eliminate the effective safeguard and bankrupt schools that dare to respect it.
There have been some blanket bans of manga in Tennessee where there's just like whole chunks of major manga titles banned. And right now, I think all it takes is for some mom for liberty to take an image out of context or just decide that she's tired of her kid reading this stuff. She sees an image that she doesn't like, that she thinks is a little too sexy, sees something out of context, you know, comes across what is just somebody in a bath. This is like something that just always makes people's heads explode anyway. Like the fact that Japan has a bathing culture and the United States does not. The whole reason I'm working all the time and have like a bajillion different plates up in the air is because manga is the format that kids read the most. I've seen data from my libraries, from other people's libraries. I know anecdotally from people telling me like, it's all my students read. I need help. I need to know what else is. And the thing is also, I'm always told, what's safe for me to put on the shelves? So constantly being consumed by young people. And the more kids read it, the more it's in the crosshairs, the more it's just visible. Publishers are nervous. And I think that goes beyond even like manga publishers, but I think especially manga publishers are nervous because quite honestly, they're like in a winning streak right now and they don't want to lose it. I think they may be afraid of pulling the spotlight even closer onto themselves with a statement. I think this also reflects to a certain extent many of their Japanese roots. We have to remember that many of these manga companies are actually like arms or kind of sprouts from companies like Shueisha, Kodansha. If they're not ready to like make a full-on statement, they could consider doing things like giving books that see a challenge, like a boost in like their advertising. Like all of a sudden there's a bunch of Sasaki and Miyano content on their social media, or consider doing actions like donating a few copies of their LGBTQ+ titles to the public library in an area where the schools have banned a title, like what happened with Sasaki and Miyano, you know, or even saying like, hey, losing out on reading this story is going to be bad for these kids, so we're going to make sure they can read it.
Like myself, you may be wondering at this point, why is there such a focus on libraries? We have an entire wealth of knowledge at our fingertips through our phones and the internet. I could Google something right now on my phone and get more information than if I got in my car and went to the library. I could find all the porn in the world plus some. Why then are these parents so focused on libraries as a place of contention? Well, the answer lies in the fact that the internet, our phones especially, are able to gather data from us at all times. Libraries don't. And in fact, libraries keep their patrons' rentals and everything else private. Therefore, libraries aren't making the government money, nor are they able to be used for surveillance. These book bans aren't just about using queer people and black people as the boogeyman for conservatives to fall in line, but they're also being used as a way to suppress thought of all people. Everyone uses libraries across the diversity spectrum, and like Tamale and Pale said, the less we know, the better. This is what censorship has always been about: keeping people illiterate and keeping people scared. Learning about people's lived experiences through books can't be untaught, so they have to make sure they're not read at all. The thing is, I can understand where some people are coming from with the regulation of media. It's easy to understand that a parent would want to keep their child safe from things as long as possible and let them keep their innocence. It's also easy to think that anything you believe or know to be wrong shouldn't be written. Library Wars grapples with this too at times, where Iku must come to terms with the fact that every library task force member might not have the exact same ideology or opinions as her. In cases like this, it's easy to have your own views on censorship challenged, which is why these book bans can seem righteous to some people. But I do think we need to turn back to Library Wars for the answer to this conundrum once again. One of the last arcs of the series surrounds an author who is being targeted by the NBC for writing a book that includes heavy details of a character enacting terrorism. This author has then become a scapegoat for a recent crime that was committed that was eerily similar to the book. Now in hiding with help from the library task force, everyone on the team worries that his arrest would cause an author hunt. Since the author had been around since before the Media Betterment Act was passed, the optimistic Iku makes sure to ask him a question. What was it like writing with such freedom? His answer isn't really one you would expect though. He says that not much was different before the censorship either. People would obviously voice their opinions about whether a book they read was offensive or politically incorrect. Sometimes people would pressure editorial staff and they would bend to public outcry. Even coordinated pressure groups would make those in charge remove books. But I think what he ends with is the important part here. Sometimes a righteous will is worse than an evil one. Some do-gooders don't know what they stand to lose. Even with the best intentions, Censorship can be wielded in the worst of ways. Those parents who are protecting their kids from gender ideology don't realize that what they'll lose in the long term is their child's education and freedom of choice. And if that isn't enough, your own rights too. It's a slippery slope that no matter what intentions you have, the government will use it against you. So what can we do? How can we help libraries? How can we save manga from being included in these book bans? And how can we stop a world like library wars actually taking place?
You can go to board meetings. You can speak in opposition to these people because they're going to like every board meeting. They're going everywhere they can, quite honestly, have a soapbox. It's very Parks and Rec-y, but not as much fun. And you can write letters and petitions, call your representative. I know we're all calling our reps way too much lately, but now's the time to get annoying and call them for every little thing. If you're in a state where legislation's trying to be passed, where they're trying to say that certain content is pornographic, then, just say like, I'm not going to vote for you if you say that, or if you vote for this. Obviously, using your local library is also really good because numbers help. They help, at least for advocating for funds where they're going to come from. Federal funds are going to be lower, so they're going to have to make a case to their states. And the thing is, the fight for funding is going to be much tighter now because there are other places that now have had their funding cut. So having those numbers that say, hey, people are utilizing us and we need to, and you can utilize them not just for checking out books, like using your local library, even just honestly, even when you just go in and you sit there to use their air conditioning when it's hot, that actually counts. Those numbers count.
I know a lot of people who are probably watching my videos aren't kids, or if they have kids, they might feel like they need to do something. Are there any ways to support school libraries if you're not exactly sure how to get involved in a school system?
It's a lot of the same things. It's going to school board meetings instead of just community board meetings. Run for the school board even. You could oust Mom for Liberty. And it's actually not that, it's not that hard. Yeah, it might be cool to like be on the school board. In NYC, we have things like the CEC and the PEP. So there are like, depending on how big your city is, there may be like all these other little parent groups that you can join. You could join your PTA. And just kind of be a voice for your own school. Honestly, writing to your former school librarian and being like, hey, you're awesome. And I know things are hard right now and I love you. Those type of things just kind of keep the morale up. Yeah. You can make sure that your local schools actually have a library and a certified school librarian. And if they don't, ask your officials why they don't. There's actually a lot of things you can do to say, hey, this should be happening. Also, if you find out that there's no manga in your school library, you should advocate for that too, because I believe that every school library should have a manga collection. If not, then you can always tell them to reach out to me and I will help whichever librarian get over whatever fear they have of manga. Yeah.
Is there anything that you would like to promote? Is there anything that you would like to say to other librarians out there who are struggling? Just any closing statements that you might have.
If you are like interested in building a school library collection of manga, please check out my book, Manga Goes to School. It was co-written with some very amazing school librarians, so it's not just by me, so it means that I can speak very highly of it. Just if you're going through these things, we are tenacious and we will get through this. And it's tough right now, but I strongly believe that the majority of people are on our side and we just have to kind of hold tight and get through it.